Okay, let's talk about economic collapses. Really, it's national collapses, but we'll focus kind of on the economic end of it for a moment, because one of the reasons I talk about this issue, you should know I talk about this issue a lot. I talk about this issue because I love history. I'm a history freak. I can't help it. I'm a history freak. I love it. And one thing I see consistently over and over and over and over again as you read about these amazing civilizations, powerful civilizations, one of the factors, and oftentimes the main factor that brings them down, is debt, money. It's not a sexy topic to talk about, especially because numbers are so nerdy. And now when we discuss our national debt and things like that, it's so big. But there are two things that consistently end nations and can end nations of any size. It doesn't matter how big and powerful your country is. Illegal immigration en masse and debt. Those two things, it can sink your ship. It doesn't matter how big your ship is. And again, you know I'm not Johnny come lately. I've been talking about this for years. The GOP lined up for the last 4 years, and voted yes, and voted yes, and voted yes, and voted yes on multiple massive spending bills. Truth is, no one cares. And no one's going to care until the whole house of cards come crashing down. And everyone's going to look around and they're going to say, well, how'd this happen? How'd this happen? Well, here's the hard truth of it. Talk about making you uncomfortable. Here's the hard truth of it. When that happens, you and I will both have to go look in the mirror and say, that's on me. I never demanded better. So I never got better. You get what you get. Don't throw a fit. Now let's discuss that aspect of it. I can't believe how much hair I used to have. We're going to have to... Matt, don't play any more of those older clips. That's my producer, Matt. Anyway, why is it on us? Well, here's the truth. When I talk to senators and congressmen in Washington, D.C. about spending, they will oftentimes, almost every time, because I only talk to the ones I like, they will agree with me. You can't spend like this. You can't run deficits like this. You can't do it. It'll end the country. It'll end the country. Everything I just said to you, everything we've talked about, you and I, they agree. It's not like I can sit down with these people and they say, no, Jesse, that's fine. No, it's no big deal. They know. They know the history. They know the history of the world. They understand how this works. And so that's the moment where I say, well, okay, why don't you do something about it? I just said it's a problem. You agree it's a problem. Why aren't you doing something about it? And they say, Jesse, the voters don't care. The American people don't care. So there's no incentive for anyone, Democrat, Republican, or not, to actually cut spending. And why don't the voters care? Well, here's the truth. The American people, because of our communist education system, have been so dumbed down to basic civics and economics and how things work that they don't make the connection between the slow, steady degradation of their way of living and the spending in Washington, D.C. I know you already make that connection, so I'm preaching to the choir here. But for the average American, and I'm not talking about just the everyday moron lib, your neighbor, your friend, shares your values. You watch football together, loves his family. When he sees Washington, D.C., Republicans and Democrats join together to pass another $1 trillion bill, he doesn't make the connection between that and the fact Americans now can't afford groceries.
We need someone in our presidency who can make this America work for the working man. It's really looking critical right now, where I don't even know if my grandchildren are going to have a future with this country.
Some of these big breakfasts of omelets and pancakes can cost less than $10. And that's what brings in Nevada Allison, who's worried about inflation.
Groceries that used to cost me $200 a couple years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, I'm spending $500 at the grocery store right now. That's going to be my biggest deciding factor. Is give me your answers. What are your solutions? Because I don't want promises and broken promises.
Okay. Heart goes out to those gentlemen. Do you want to hear the solution? Are you ready for this? It's going to be a long special, but There are going to be some hard truths in this special. Are you ready for the solution? Because everyone right now talking about inflation, obviously, people are suffering. You just heard it. Can't make ends meet. I'm worried about my kids. I'm worried about my grandkids. I want to hear your solution. We have to cut everything. Everything. Well, Jesse, we can't cut, fill in the blank, whatever. I know that's instinctively where people go. They'll pick their thing the federal government does. Maybe it's the thing they love or the thing they're dependent on. It doesn't matter where it is. But the entire bloated federal budget, they'll find their thing and they'll grab a hold of it when you talk about cutting spending and they'll say, yeah, cut everything, just not this. I don't know what thing you just grabbed a hold of and tried to cover up when I said that, but it has to be cut too. Because right now we are $35 trillion in debt. Our debt to GDP ratio, they say it's 100%, it's 120, it's plus that. We are spending as if we are in a world war, and yet we are in peacetime that will bring about inflation and economic collapse. The only way to stop out of control inflation is Washington, D.C. stopping the amount of spending they do. Now, go look at the federal budget. Every single slice of it, even the ones you love, it has to be cut. And I don't love that either. Look, there are things that I love. Me, I love the military. I'm a dude. I can't help it. Since I was a kid, I wanted the Lego set. I never got one of those, but I wanted that big. You ever see that big aircraft carrier Lego set? I wanted it. I'd play with G.I. Joe's fighter jets and stuff. It's part of the reason I joined the Marine Corps. I want to see guns and bombs and planes. I love the military. And I know, as a country, it's really important for us to have things like a strong Navy, much as that pains me to say. We have 2 huge oceans. We need a big, powerful, technologically advanced Navy. We don't have the money. I'm sorry. Military too. Got to be cut. And the people who are angry about inflation, which is pretty much all of us at this point in time, what percentage of those people understand that that's the only solution? The only solution. Sure, you can grow the economy and that will help, but you can't grow your way out of $35 trillion in debt. You can't grow your way out of $2 trillion deficits every year. You can't. And that growth only comes with Trump. If, God forbid, Kamala Harris wins the election, do you have any idea what things like this will do?
And how do you find that line to make sure corporations are paying their fair share, but they're not leaving our country?
Well, listen, I work with a lot of CEOs. I have spent a lot of time with CEOs, and I'm going to tell you that the business leaders who are actually part of the engine of America's economy agree that people should pay their fair share. They also agree that when we look at a plan such as mine that is about investing in the middle class, investing in new industries, investing in bringing down costs, invest in entrepreneurs like small businesses, that the overall economy is stronger and everyone benefits.
Whatever economic disaster is coming our way, and there is one coming, it can't be stopped. It will get here much sooner and be so much more severe if that woman gets into office. But let's not focus only on Democrats here. I don't do that. I will never do that. The truth is, Republicans spend too much money. Every single one of them does. Well, at least all the presidents have, and almost all the ones in the Senate and the House. Even ones we love, even sacred ones to Republicans. Ronald Reagan spent too much money. Bill Clinton spent too much money. Barack Obama spent too much money. George Bush I spent too much money. George Bush II spent too much money. Trump himself spent more money than any other president in the history of mankind in his 4 years. We cannot continue this. Mitch McConnell, the most powerful Republican in D.C., brags about all the money of yours he spent.
So, admittedly, I'm pretty proud of the fact that with a Democratic president, a Democratic House, and a Democratic Senate, we were able to achieve, through this omnibus spending bill, essentially all of our priorities.
Doesn't that kind of sum it up? We were able to achieve all of our priorities. Well, that begs the question. It's $1 trillion spending bill. That was Mitch McConnell after he passed $1 trillion omnibus bill in a lame duck Congress. Is $1 trillion spending bill accomplished all of your objectives? But what are your objectives then? Because my objective is to preserve the way of life that I've known for my children and their children after them and their children after them. That's my objective. And that's why I know spending must be cut. If you just spend $1 trillion we don't have of government goodies and handouts to this person, this entity, this country, well, that says all you need to know about your objective. We have to get the GOP in line too, but to get the GOP in line, back to what we said, you have to get the American people in line. You have to connect those dots for them. Every single time Washington, D.C. passes a bill to spend your money, your groceries get more expensive. Every single time. We have to hammer that point home over and over and over again. And I talked earlier about the cuts that are coming, the cuts that are necessary. Don't think that's just me, rabid anti-communist barbarian Jesse. We had Senator Rand Paul on this show. He laid it out for you. It's clear as day. You think you know more than Rand?
And it's not that I want to have reforms. It's that if we don't have the reforms, there will be no Social Security for the next generation and there will be no Medicare. And it's going to happen pretty quickly. Within the next couple of years, the people who live on the basic smallest amount of Social Security, which I believe is around $700 a month, those people will get a 20% cut in their Social Security unless we reform it. So you have to reform it.
Jesse, I don't want to cut. You can't cut my, whatever it may be. You don't understand. I don't want to take anything away from you. I'm trying to save the United States of America. Massive reforms are necessary. We protect the people we have to protect, the ones who are trying to keep the lights on, keep food on the table. But while doing that, it is time to carve through the federal budget like it's Thanksgiving and there's a turkey in front of you and you have that electric cutting knife, which is really cool, by the way. It's the only way to save this country. It's the only way to save our way of life. Your life is more expensive because of Washington spending. Your life is more expensive because of Washington spending. Repeat those words over and over and over and over again to every single person you know. When your Democrat, Republican, independent friend complains about the price of anything in his life, repeat those words to him or her until they finally understand. And then maybe, just maybe, we will begin electing people who will make the tough choices to begin cutting. All that may have made you uncomfortable, but I am right. Carol Roth is going to talk about our debt to GDP, and so much else. Next. Well, with all this sunny economic news, it's probably a good time to bring up the fact that our debt to GDP is now 100%. In case you're wondering when the last time that happened was, it was World War II. So as I have explained to you many, many times, and as Carol has as well, we are a nation currently in peacetime without some major national disaster, without any of these things. And we are spending as if we're a country fighting an apocalyptic world war. What does that mean? Well, it means this can't go on. As that saying goes, that which cannot go on will not go on, this will not go on. Joining me now, author of the book, You Will Own Nothing, which is sadly apropos for where we are, Carol Roth. Carol, okay, you say debt to GDP is 100%. That doesn't really register, though. It sounds like a bunch of eco-nerd talk. What does that mean?
I actually say debt to GDP is north of 120%. Where are we getting that number from may actually be backing out some of the intergovernmental spending. But we still owe it in one way, shape, or form, so I'm not going to back it out. Basically, if you think about the amount of debt to the entire output of the country, the benchmark that, whether it's the Treasury or the IMF, where they say that that becomes unwieldy is around 60, maybe 70% debt to GDP. So we are functionally 2 times as high as we should be. And normally in a country that had debt to GDP at this level, you probably see some sort of sovereign wealth crisis and, some massive implosion. Because we have the world's reserve currency and the world's trading currency, that hasn't happened yet. But people like to take the fact that it hasn't happened and then say that, well, that's sort of proof that it will never happen. And that just isn't the case. Everybody, the IMF, the CBO, the Treasury, the Fed, Jamie Dimon, billionaires, everybody said this is an unsustainable fiscal path. But what they don't like to say, Jesse, is, okay, it's an unsustainable fiscal path. What are we going to do to fix it? And if we have the ability to fix it, do we really have the political will to fix it? And I think that is the discussion point that needs to be had. Do we really believe, if we're able to thread this very delicate needle in terms of growing the economy, reducing some of the government spending, and trying to do that in a way that doesn't cause inflation or doesn't have any other side implications, does anybody have the political will or the competence to get that done?
Okay, well, no. Obviously, the answer to that question is no, not to put too fine a point on it. So since the answer to that question is no, the Democrats want the country to collapse, the Republicans don't have the guts to stop it, where are we going?
So I wish I had the crystal ball that could perfectly predict the timing, that could perfectly predict the path. All we have are these rhyming benchmarks, what has happened in other countries when this has happened previously. One of the things that happens anytime there is a big financial sea change tends to be a massive war. That's what happened to England before us and the Dutch before the English, is that's what encountered the financial sea change and was sort of this last ditch effort to try to figure out how we're going to have, some sort of resetting of the financial stakes. And I think that is realistically one of the things on the table. Another thing that is on the table is something that we have been seeing over the last few years, which is just rampant inflation, right? We've seen that over and over again. And instead of letting the economy go through the recession that should have happened from the bad fiscal and monetary policy, they said, we can't show that. We can't have that. So we're just going to keep spending more on a headline basis. It's going to look like we're doing great. We're going to put more money into the economy and basically just devalue everybody's purchasing power. Because what happens when you create inflation is it's better for the debt holders, right? That the nominal value of all of dollars goes down. So if you're holding debt, the actual value of that is going down, on a relative basis, but it's not good for the people who are trying to earn and try to purchase. So I think that is the most likely path. Yes, if you have, a certain set of people in charge versus other people in charge, maybe you have a little bit of an opportunity for more growth. Maybe they're going to rein in spending a little bit. But as you said, they're not going to have the political will to do the difficult things. So I think that means buckle up. You're going to see a resurgence of more and more inflation. It's going to be harder for the middle and working class to get ahead. The people who are on top, who are holding the assets, the elite, the well-connected, will appear to do well because their stock holdings will increase from a numbers basis and their houses will increase from a numbers basis. And you will end up having, more of a chasm on a for non-merit-based reasons between the haves and have-nots. And I know you're a better student of history than I am, Jesse, but you know what happens when you have that huge chasm between the haves and the have-nots and what that means for social unrest. So whether we get the social unrest, just within the country, or that's something that, catches on globally, I think that's a realistic possibility. I wish I could tell you when. This could go on for, 10 months, it could go on for 5 years, it could go on for 20 years. I don't have the answer, but we can see that trajectory, and all we can do is plan, which is why I wrote You Will Own Nothing, and encourage people, if possible, to try to own something that will have the opportunity to inflate in value while you have your purchasing power continually stolen from you.
Carol, I'm glad you brought up the global consequences and global nature of this, because for better and worse, we are a global economy now. We have been for quite some time. And when you know things, when you look into things historically like the Great Depression, you realize this was not an American thing. This was a worldwide thing. So who leads the world into the next depression? Do we lead it, or does the world go into it and drag us with them?
No, 100%. We're the leader. We're the world's reserve currency and trading currency. The call, unfortunately, is coming, from Washington, D.C. It's coming from inside the House. As we go, the rest of the world goes. If things happen in other countries, it may have some impact on us, but it's certainly not going to have that blowback. But the challenge is, as we implode, everybody else is going to implode. And that's why that scariness of, potential world war to create sort of the backdrop for some, coming together and a new accord, a new financial reset, is, I hate to say it, but it is a very realistic possibility. It's not certainly one that I am hoping for or wishing for, but to say that that's not something that would be on the table, I think it is silly. I think it's also one of the reasons why you're seeing, as central banks around the world get rid of their holdings of U.S. Treasuries, they're not going into some other currency. They're not saying, oh, well, this country is a much better option, or let's go with the euro or whatnot. They're going to gold. And, that has been part of, many financial resets in the past. It is a neutral-ish reserve currency, that each of these countries are now stockpiling in different amounts. And we're seeing more and more of these countries add that to their reserves. So, that's something you need to keep an eye on. And what are they telling us? What are they signaling? What are they worried about? And it's not just lessening the dependence on the United States dollar because they don't like the United States and they're trying to stick it to us. They're really worried that if something happens, they want to be able to have something that's tangible that they can use when everybody goes and tries to divvy up the stakes. So, in a new financial world order, who gets what. At least they say, well, we have this pot of gold and you have this, so we all have this. Maybe we can figure out something with that.
Yeah, hard assets. How about that? Carol Roth, everybody. Appreciate you, Carol. All right. Tiana Lowe Doescher is going to join us next.
What is your economic plan moving forward for people who are living paycheck to paycheck and struggling for groceries and rent and homeowners?
So, look, I grew up, my sister and I were raised by our mother. We lived for a long time in an apartment on top of a child care center. I, from a child, knew who our small business owners are, right? I mean, you're business leaders, but you're also civic leaders. You take seriously your voice and how you can mentor, how you can grow, right? Communities and the sense of communities. I love our small businesses. So a lot of my work, even in the Senate, was about increasing access to capital through our small businesses, and in particular through our community banks. Mm-hmm. So I've been responsible for billions of dollars more now going into our community banks, because they're in the community and then they know who's in the community and where the talent is and who's doing good in the community, what the community wants. Mm-hmm.
I'm just so confused. Joining me now, my friend Tiana Lowe Doescher, columnist with the Washington Examiner, to make us smarter economically. All right, Tiana, as you know, I'm stupid and uneducated. So could you please explain to me what she just said there?
I don't think she knows what she just said there. It's emotional support economics. Look, when she thinks about people complaining about grocery prices, she's envisioning the Brentwood country farmers market, people with their designer groceries, getting organic this, farm to table that. That's not the reality for the average American. The average American is getting their groceries from a grocery store that is a big block chain that has about a 1% to 2% profit margin, smaller than almost any other industry, right? And food prices have moved on par with overall prices, about 20% since Joe Biden and Kamala Harris took office. It's everything else that's gotten even more expensive. Service prices, housing, all of that. And she has no answers for that. Casey Mulligan, the economist from University of Chicago, did a study that found the majority of the excess inflation that we've had in the past 4 years was stoked by the 2 tie-breaking votes that Harris cast as president of the Senate for the $2 trillion American Rescue Plan and then the $1.3 trillion Inflation Reduction Act, which, as we know, did nothing of the sort. In terms of what she wants to do to fix it, she wants to come down on the grocery stores, which again, we've established have about a 1% to 2% profit margin, and seen. That's it. There is no real plan.
And still, I'm flabbergasted by that number, and I know that number. I can't believe there's any industry anywhere that runs on a 1% to 2% profit margin that just floors me. It absolutely blows me away. But anyway, let's not major on the minor here. Tiana, I try to not think about this. I try to not think about how completely screwed we are economically if she wins, because you know me, I think we're screwed anyway. I don't think there's anything that can stop a $35 trillion debt train. But gosh, are we turbo screwed if that woman wins, right?
Yeah, because the issue with inflation is that it's cumulative, right? You don't want to have deflation because deflation really screws with the economy, and it's usually associated with dramatic real economic losses, massive unemployment, Great Depression style deflation, right? And we don't want to have actual disinflation. What we do want is inflation to stop increasing or, stabilize at that 1% rate it was at when, Donald Trump left office. And then you want to have a bunch of economic growth make up the gap. Donald Trump is a spending issue. Donald Trump has no real plans to cut spending. However, he's good on growth. So what you can do if you don't dramatically increase the spending, if you deregulate the economy, right? Trump was the first president in, 15 years that actually saved money with regulatory policy rather than add on to the deficit. Even George W. Bush wasn't good about this. The last person that did this even kind of was Bill Clinton. Donald Trump actually wound up saving a bunch of taxpayer money through deregulatory policy because you get more economic growth, and that increases the tax base. Look, you would think with what everyone on the left says about the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act that we would have a tax revenue issue, but we don't. Tax revenue was up 11% this fiscal year, last fiscal year to this fiscal year, with corporate tax revenue up 29%. And that's with the Trump tax cuts, right? The evil corporate tax cut giveaways still in effect. We are getting more tax revenue overall and more corporate tax revenue than we ever have in this country's history. The issue is the spending. So on the one hand, you can have growth, and that helps offset some of it because we know the Laffer curve is a thing. We know we need more economic growth, the better. It's better for you. It's better for me. It's better for our neighbors' jobs. It's also good for the tax base. But on the spending element, the issue with Harris is you aren't going to get any more of the deregulatory policy because you've already seen what she wants to do deregulatory-wise, plus with more spending. You and I both at least understand supply and demand. So if we have a housing crisis right now, which we do, we have way too few homes because the Fed kept interest rates at 0 for 14 years. The solution is not to throw money at the consumer. The demand is already there. The solution is to build the houses.
Tiana, can you explain, we'll sidestep Kamala and for a few moments, can you explain why deflation is bad? Because people see their dollar hasn't gone as far, obviously because we've had inflation, and people want it to go back. They want it to deflate, but you say it's bad, and you're correct about that, but people don't understand why. Can you please explain why?
So let's just say you are buying a big durable good, something like a refrigerator or a television, something you don't buy regularly. You have money for it. You don't need to, take out a loan, but it is a bigger expense. And if you think that the price of consumer electronics are going down 5% every single month, and remember, we've had consumer spending categories where they have increased by multiple percentage points in a month under this inflation. So let's reverse it. Let's say TVs are going down in price 5% every single month. Everyone's not going to spend their money, and you don't want to bring the economy to a halt. You don't want everyone just holding on to their dollars indefinitely. It's different if you're investing. If you are investing it in the stock market, if you're investing it in, small businesses, if you're investing it in bonds, that's different. That helps fuel economic growth. But the incentive structure is removed in a radically deflationary environment. There's a reason why the 1% to 2% inflation, which is the Federal Reserve target, it's what we had for 4 years, from 2017 through 2020, including through COVID. We had that very minimal, stable, expected inflation. So for instance, an employer knows I'm going to get a 2% cost of living adjustment in this normal environment. And hopefully economic growth means I can give more performance-based raises. That doesn't happen when you don't know what's going to happen to price stability. And it's why the goal for the Fed isn't no inflation, it's price stability. It makes it so much easier for, the folks in charge of companies and factories and the big physical elements of the economy that need to be prepared.
Tiana, how did the Democrats like Kamala Harris, how did they become the party of big business? Because they very much are. Obviously, they sell themselves as being for the little guy and the poor man. But no, all the major Fortune 500 companies, well, not all of them, but pretty much all of them, are run by filthy commies who support Democrats. Now, when and how exactly did that happen?
There's obviously been the polarization from what we could just call the expert class. The reason why you had a bunch of economists swear that doing an extra $2 trillion of American Rescue Plan spending wouldn't stoke inflation, even though we had just put an unprecedented $4 trillion in the economy because of COVID, right? So you have the Democratic Party base has obviously become much more college-educated, professional degree, right? Kamala Harris she has a 40-point lead with college-educated white women. Where you see everything backslide is voters without degrees have gone overwhelmingly to the right, and that's across racial lines. The secondary reason for why this has happened, other than just the ideological capture, the fact that things like ESG, DEI, these have become mandates within these companies. I mean, it's why you see Robin DiAngelo getting hired by Netflix, and climate change goals for Coca-Cola. On top of that, going back to the 14 years of 0% interest rates, it made it so that way we made the cost of borrowing free, and it made it a lot easier to give away. It's a lot easier to make a profit when debt is free, and for these companies to have engaged in these social experiments, in these political social experiments. And now it's much more difficult, and they just want to get back to free money, easy access, and a government that can bail them out.
Tiana, finally, we don't talk enough about the economic impact of illegal immigration. Obviously, every time there's a drug overdose or a rape or a murder or something terrible like that, it hits the news. But the American people don't really understand the impact this has on the education system, the medical system, the housing crisis. Economically, importing people by the million and then paying them to be here is devastating for the American citizen, and that's Kamala Harris's policies.
That's been the explicit policy for the last 4 years. And you know me, Jesse, I am a pro-free market, pro-immigration, libertarian in economics. However, that's not the system that we have. So on top of the fact that you have states like California, where California, all undocumented immigrants are entitled to Medi-Cal, which is their state-sponsored health insurance. You have other states that also use federally subsidized, that means federally funded, Medicaid that are given to undocumented immigrants. And this would be different if they were paying into the system, but they aren't always. And so that's why you have this dramatic insolvency, right? Like Social Security actually, to an extent, is more safe from this than the major healthcare spending. Federal food stamps, those are things where you can't import a bunch of people into the country and let them starve. And especially in blue sanctuary states, the federal government subsidizes some of these programs and the dollars get all mixed because it's all fungible. You have something also very explicit. I went to Springfield, Ohio. There's no evidence of people eating dogs or eating cats. What there is evidence of is the entire economy in a crisis. And everyone in Springfield agrees that the Haitians are victims here. The villain is the government, and here's why. You have a lot of these migrants who are not illegal because they've been granted TPS, and a part of TPS, they get federally funded Medicaid and federally funded food stamps. You have these local slumlords that negotiate their employment contracts with Dole fruit manufacturing and Dole fruit packaging. And they explicitly say, you can pay these Haitian migrants, bottom of the barrel wages because they have federally funded healthcare. And that undercuts the local market rate of labor, which is not free market economics. That's not capitalism. And the people, the worst off there are the Haitians that are making slave wages. It's not good for anybody. Importing, and again, I'm not opposed to people that come into the system the correct way, where you don't need, subsidized housing, and where you can speak the language, where you have enough translators, where you learn English. That's not what's happening here. Instead, it's a bunch of very cheap labor that has to be subsidized by you and me. And at the same time, it's undercutting the wages of everyone else that's already here.
Yeah. Slave labor is not free markets. It's a really wonderful way to put that. Tiana, appreciate you as always. Dynamite. All right. We have the new big cheese and the House Freedom Caucus next. I'll be interested to see. Does he have anything to say? Hang on.
Inflation is made in Washington because only Washington can create money. And any other attribution to other groups of inflation is wrong. Consumers don't produce it. Producers don't produce it. The trade unions don't produce it. Foreign sheiks don't produce it. Oil imports don't produce it. What produces it is too much government spending and too much government creation of money and nothing else.
Man, there's nobody who put complicated things better than Milton Friedman. Gosh. Anyway, we're a little bit of ways away from that way of thinking in this country. Joining me now, Representative Andy Harris, I should say, from Maryland, member of the House Freedom Caucus, which tells you he's one of the few good ones out there. Congressman, I almost don't even want to say this because it hurts me to even say it, but the national debt wasn't even $1 trillion when Milton Friedman gave that speech back in the 70s. Now it's 35. We are doing well.
Well, it's pretty close to 36. It's just completely out of control. Completely out of control.
Congressman, how do we stop it? It doesn't seem like there's any appetite to stop it, to be frank, with either party. I know we love to complain because Democrats spend as much or more, but Republicans love to spend. The American citizen doesn't see a problem with spending. It's as if there are no powerful forces trying to stop inflation. Everyone's mad about it. No one's trying to stop it.
Look, you're absolutely right. There's no question about it. The uniparty here in Washington loves to spend. And again, people have come to expect it. Look, we have disasters around. People come to expect the federal government to come in, create dollars, because we're all borrowing the dollars. We're all creating these dollars to help with things like that. Again, we are $2 trillion federal deficits every year, year over year. And I have to tell you, Jesse, the only thing that will stop it is the thing that stops it happening in individual states. You have to have a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution. You actually have to have a law that says you can't overspend.
Which seems like, I don't want to overstate, but that seems like almost an impossibility because that kind of a thing has to be passed in Washington, D.C. And you'll have to forgive me, but the same group of people who just passed yet another CR, which in and of itself is a scandal, I need to remind everybody, don't seem like the same group of people who are going to vote to balance their budget.
You're absolutely right. All I'm saying is that that's the way it would have to be solved, but it practically speaking can't be solved that way either. Because you're right, we attempted to do it. I was elected with the Tea Party wave in 2010. We attempted to do it shortly after that. We couldn't even do it then when we had larger majorities in the House.
Yeah, what's going on with the omnibus bill, the minibus bill? I believe me, I've heard that no, there's not going to be an omnibus, but I'm sorry, I've heard many of those things before. I also heard there wouldn't be any money for Ukraine until there was border security, and then that disappeared like a fart in the wind. So is there going to be an omnibus, or is this just a bunch of Washington bluster?
Well, at this point, look, we intend in the Freedom Caucus, we will hold Michael Johnson to his word. Mike Johnson said that he is not going to do an omnibus bill. He's not going to agree to one in December. Again, if we win the elections, then I see no reason why we shouldn't kick all these discussions into next year when potentially we could hold both houses of Congress and the presidency. But look, we're going to hold Mike Johnson to his word. He said quite emphatically there's going to be no omnibus. Now, look, we have some skepticism on that too, because just like you say, we've heard this kind of thing before, but we'll give Mike Johnson a chance. He says he's not going to do it. Hopefully he doesn't, because that Christmas omnibus is usually loaded up and larded up. Honestly, if this were a regular year and Mike hadn't said this, we probably would have that omnibus in front of us pretty quickly with $100 billion supplemental for disaster on top of it, with another $50 billion perhaps for Ukraine. Israel is aid as well. Again, we have to avoid the Christmas omnibus. The speaker has said he's not going to do it. We're gonna try to hold him to his word.
Yeah, well, I guess we'll see if that happens. The Freedom Caucus, is it growing or is it shrinking? Because we really need you guys to grow and be even more powerful than you are.
Well, it's about the same size. It's been the same size for several years now. You know, if it gets too big, the trouble is we don't have that many true conservatives in Washington, as you can imagine. So it's not an unlimited, we can't have the entire, it would be great to have the entire conference, but we're never going to have that. So we have to be the vanguard of the conservative movement within the House of Representatives. That's our goal. And by sticking together and forcing the conference in a more conservative direction, hopefully we can, again, turn the country around to a better direction. But it is long, hard work, let me tell you.
No doubt. Congressman, thank you so much. I appreciate it. All right. We'll be back. The other night, I didn't want to go home from work. When the show was over and it was time to take off my earpiece, I didn't want to go home from work. Why? My son, one of them, I'm not going to tell you which one, got himself in a little bit of trouble in school. It was fine. He's a good kid. It's no big deal. But I knew that when I got home that night, I didn't get to do the, Dad's home, how are my buddies? Whoa, what do you want, a pizza? I didn't get to be that guy. I had to go home, crack the whip, and make hard choices. Hard choices suck. They do. When we discuss these things about our economy and the economic collapse, it's hard to hear and it's hard to think about. We don't want it. We don't want to have to sit down and look at this government service or this or that and say, no, you need to stop spending it. Please stop sending it. Please stop Save My Way. We don't want to do that because that's a hard conversation. We want to go home and eat pizza with our sons. But we've got to go home and ground them. We've got to begin grounding our politicians now. Spending in debt isn't some absurd side issue. Well, don't talk about it till after the election. It is the issue. And as the normal, average, everyday American gets steamrolled by inflation, by all this madness, debt and deficits and spending, it's going to rise to the surface, and everyone is going to realize in the end, it might be the only thing that mattered, and it was the thing we neglected. I don't want to have to make hard choices. You don't want to have to make hard choices, but hard choices are oftentimes necessary. We sit right here in our position as American people, and it's time to make them. Start demanding your politician cut spending to save you, and more specifically, your children. All right? All right, we'll do it again.